Good morning, everybody. We are now live. We're just going to wait for participants to join and get to a number where close to what we're expecting today. Giving everyone a chance to log in. We have Alex and Jackie Blake ready to talk to you very shortly. So if you bear with us for a couple of minutes, we are up to 40 participants. We're expecting a few more than that, so if you could just hang on for another minute or two and we will go live. Just to introduce again, Alex is the Shadow Minister for Public Health and Jackie Blake, the LACA National Vice Chair, who will be speaking to you today. Participants are still going up. If you want to introduce yourselves, then please use the chat button. And for any questions during today's webinar, please use the Q&A. We'll go live in about a minute's time, properly live in a minute's time. So yeah, please make sure you exchange views on the Q&A, but use the, exchange views on the chat, but use the Q&A for questions so Jackie and Alex can see those as they come through. Right, I think we're largely there now, so we seem to have not got lots more coming in. So I'm going to pass over to Jackie, who will introduce Alex properly. Thank you, Jackie. Jackie, you're on mute.
Ready to do apologise. So good morning, everyone. I'm Jackie. I'm the Vice Chair of LACA and Commercial Operations Manager for Nottingham City Council Catering Service. Thanks for joining us today for our latest in our series of webinars. Hopefully they're keeping you informed and providing opportunities for you to ask questions. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Zoom, but just another reminder, the bar at the bottom of your screen, if you'd like to use that for Q&A, for your questions, and we will try and answer as many as we can, but anyway, we don't get through. We are recording this live, so that will put up on our website later, and any questions that aren't answered, then again, we'll put those up on the website. So as we move into a period of easing of restrictions of lockdown this weekend, more pupils starting to return to school, I'm pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Alex Norris MP for Nottingham North and Shadow Minister for Public Health. Alex is also a governor at one of our local schools in Nottingham and has had a keen interest in school food from his days when he was one of our local councillors. And as the Prime Minister's announced his investment plans for schools and his vision for tackling obesity, and Gavin Williamson has confirmed all pupils will be returning in September, I'd like to invite Alex to share with us a few thoughts with us and some of the Labour Party's views on this. Thanks, Alex.
Great, thank you, Jackie, and thanks everybody for having me and for making time for us to have a discussion on this Friday morning. Yeah, my name, as Jackie very kindly said, my name's Alex Norris. I'm Member of Parliament for Nottingham North, so we've got a Nottingham theme on the top table today, which I'm very pleased about. And I'm also Shadow Public Health Minister. I have, as Jackie said, a long-standing interest and enthusiasm for school food. I think if anybody who's certainly a council and a local authority, as I was for 6 years, you come into contact with it and see the transformative difference that good school food makes. So you naturally do. But also, as Jackie says, as a chair of school governors at a primary school in my community, as I have been for the last decade, you know, oh, now the dogs are going to start barking. Quiet. Oh, God. So hold on. Sorry, he will stop barking in a second. So you do, as a chair of governors, you absolutely do. Roni, shush, good boy. So yeah, as I say, as a chair of governors, I've seen the transformative difference. My community is one of the poorest in the country. So again, our free school meal rates are as high as, you know, as anybody's is around. So I see the massive difference that it makes. But also for us as a school, you know, we pride ourselves, you know, our young people are going through incredibly challenging things at home. Not all of them, but lots and lots of them. So we're a haven during those, you know, at those 6 or 7 hours a day, we are a haven. And a core part of that is knowing that we're feeding them properly, and that actually for a lot of them, that is, you know, their best and only good meal of the day. So what a profound and important moment that is in you know, in our contact with a young person and a child. But of course, COVID's changed everything, hasn't it? You know, if we think of what we were doing, you know, 6 months ago, even 4 or 5 months ago, it seems a different world when you know, I was talking to friends last night about the general election, and it just seems a different lifetime ago. And COVID stopped that all on a dime. And, you know, for us, the priority straight away, you know, the first question, obviously we knew there were significant health implications that would be for others to be dealing with. But for me as a community leader, never mind member of parliament, I felt, you know, we knew straight away that the issue was going to be hunger. Because certainly for those who are not in school, but would normally have been in school, they wouldn't be getting that access to that hot, nutritious meal. So our only question was straight away, how can we get food out to people? And, you know, it's the creativity of people in this Zoom, people like yourselves, who up and down the country have created community eating hubs, and shared and, you know, and got food out to people that's made an incredible difference. It's actually, you know, certainly talking to Conservative colleagues who represent better off communities than mine, is quite an interesting sort of reversal than normal, because for us in Nottingham, and certainly for us in our part of Nottingham, as you know, Jackie, you know, we've been in the business of getting food out to people for a long time, because school, if nothing else, the 6-week summer holiday is a really challenging period for our families. So we actually had the networks ready to go. And, you know, when we were able to fire them up quite quickly, whereas in other places they're having to sort of generate those things and start from scratch. So again, you know, that's been critical, and, you know, people like yourselves have been absolutely integral to that across the country and have made an incredible difference to people's lives. Obviously, you know, that kind of leads us on to free school meals over the summer. You know, I'm a Manchester City fan, a big Manchester City fan, so it doesn't give me a lot of pleasure in praising Marcus Rashford, but obviously what Marcus did was an incredible thing. I'm very excited to see what social ill he takes on next, because he's clearly got a lot of passion, and he's a great campaigner. So I think that's really exciting personally. So that's good. The government were right to move on it. You know, they were slow, and I'm afraid much of the response in COVID has been slow. But, you know, I'm a firm believer, you know, that for a start, there's no political points in a pandemic. There just aren't. And also politicians U-turning, whilst, you know, unpopular and leads to bad headlines, etc. Politicians changing their mind is a good thing. Digging in when you're wrong is a bad thing. So, you know, I'm certainly not trying to run any victory laps. And as a short-term stopgap solution, it is a good thing. We would also note, you know, free school meal vouchers, actually, I'm not that enthusiastic about. I think it's great and I'll take it. And for my community, it's really important. I also know that if you gave the money to, you know, Nottingham City Catering, for example, or the various community projects across the city that are working in collaboration as we have, you could spend that money much better. You get much better food out of it. And with the savings, you could then have a series of physical exercise activities around it, you know, what we call fit and fed. So, it was the right thing for now. It was the right thing for a crisis, but I don't think, you know, that's certainly not something that I would look at as a long-term solution. But I do think there needs to be investment in community eating projects. You know, the government have done that. Now, they're doing this for a second summer, but as colleagues may know, if they've been part of consortium bidding, quite right. If you've been part of consortium bidding, you know that it's been quite hard to get that money. It's only gone to a few pilot sites. Hold on one second, don't keep quiet. So that kind of leads me neatly on, I think, to just a bit of a reference to childhood obesity, because, you know, moving on from COVID, that is a really significant challenge for us as a country. It's one we don't talk about enough. You know, we have a bubble of ill health that is building that will have profound impact in later generations. And if I understand as a millennial that, you know, I'm likely to be working a very, very long time, much longer than obviously parents or certainly grandparents. Those generations behind are going to be working even longer. So if healthy life expectancy continues to stall, healthy life expectancy being sort of crudely being age at your first disability, you know, that's a big problem. You know, that as a societal problem is not sustainable. And obesity is a really anchor part of how you create those early and avoidable disabilities. So we have to do something about it. I think the government's approach in recent years has been a dog's dinner. You know, the fact that they've had to have, they had the strategy that they had, and then had to call that chapter 1 because frankly it was just not very good. So that's why it's good news that the Prime Minister seems to have a renewed focus on this, and we as an opposition will support them in that venture, but we will press them in that venture to go further, because what we know in the past, fundamentally I think they know the things that they need to be doing, but they fall over quite quickly in the face of very powerful lobbying interests, and that's just a reality, and we have to do an awful lot better there. And again, school is an integral part of that, and Gavin Williamson saying yesterday, schools back in September is a very good thing. And obviously we want that to be done safely. We want work to be put on doing it safely, but we need children back. Certainly in a community like mine, losing any day's loss of education for any child is a disaster for us, because our outcomes are already, differentially worse than the rest of the country, and we will lose more from lost education. So I want our children in school as much as physically possible. From a party policy perspective, obviously we're 4 years away from a general election, so we have the luxury. There's virtually no good things about being in opposition whatsoever, but you do have the luxury of taking time to get your policy right, and that's part of the reasons that I do things like this, to hear from people who know what they're talking about and try and steal your ideas to make me look clever, which has always worked very effectively for me. But particularly around the idea of universal infant-free school meals up to Key Stage 2, that was something that was in our manifesto for the December election. I think that's something that we're still enthusiastic about, and again, I'm interested to sort of hear people's views on that. But I do think, and again, I have to say this in opposition, because otherwise you get a bit demoralised. I don't think the government alone will get there on this. I just think it's too hard for them. I know that Prime Minister Johnson is prides himself as a social liberal. So the idea of doing things that are prescriptive around consumption is very challenging for him personally. So there has to be sector leadership. And, I spend a lot of time talking to, whether it's chocolate manufacturers or fizzy drinks manufacturers, about reformulation. And that I think is really critical. But you guys have already been big leaders on that. You're a good 10 years down the line on reformulation when it comes to, even more than 10 years, 15 years down the line. And the strides that's been made in the school food sector are really, I think, a real beacon. So I think it's important. I think, and I might be wrong, and you'll all tell me if I am, but I think you could tell that story better. And if you did, I think that would raise the tide for other companies that don't want to do it, frankly, and haven't yet been forced to. I think you can show how you can deliver better. And obviously you've done that in the context of 6 years on a cash freeze, and that's not sustainable for much longer. But that helps your case for arguing for that when you demonstrate how well what you've done, and you've done it well. So I think, Jackie, that's probably where I'd leave it. The last things I'd written on my notes was just to say the 3 words: you are leaders. You guys are leaders. You're leaders in a sort of double sense. Firstly, you're leading and have done this and have been in this space for a long time. So when we talk about healthiest generation of children, which should be our aspiration, you've already been contributing to that on a day-by-day basis for millions of children over the last decade and a half, and obviously beyond that for decades and decades. So you've been leading the way, but you also, I think, you have a potential platform to stand and be real model leaders too, and to drag a sector that's sometimes a bit unwilling to drag them with you, and to use all that know-how and experience you've got. So I think that gives you and yourselves actually a very exciting future. I think there's things that have to happen nationally to support you better, but otherwise I think your outlook is bright, and I look forward to working with you in the years to come.
Thank you very much, Alex. That's really interesting and good to know that you're on the same page with all of us, and really kind words actually about how we are leading, because that's important to us, and particularly your comments around obesity and how we can influence that. We obviously feel that we're best placed to do that. So if you're okay, I'll move on to some of the questions that are coming in. One of them is in response to Tulip Sadiq's question about universal infant free school meals from September, and will they continue? Obviously the reply was that it will be till 2021. obviously from our sector concerns there that there's not a longer term commitment. What sort of pressure do you think you can bring to bear on the government to extend this commitment, you know, and obviously, as you've said, to all pupils as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really important that as you deal with a pandemic, so you put in short-term measures, and you know, you put in a furlough scheme and you make it 6 months, blah blah blah. You can't just keep incrementally adding a couple of months on the end. And you know, I think that's analogous to free school meals, because if you're going to get the value out of it, you need to have proper planning time. So you know, we're certainly pushing for that to be put on a more regular footing. I think, you know, the case for it is so strong. So if that, you know, I think this is the opportunity, and we'll be pressing the government to say, come on, let's put it on a regular footing, at least, you know, for a medium term, so that governors, commissioners in local authorities, commissioners in academy trusts, providers can all, you know, can plan properly. And I think that's the best way, because you'll get a better value and better quality service. Whereas if you just keep adding a term on at a time or a year on at a time, you'll just be doing standstill all the time, and that you won't get the full benefit of it.
Thank you. We've got a question from John Figgin, who's head of catering in West Sussex. He asked that reduced lunch times, pupils bringing in food, stopping at shops on the way to school, less time to exercise, all the things that obviously impact on obesity. Is the time right to extend the school day by half an hour at each end as a permanent measure to benefit all pupils?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's a great question. I mean, we've always imagined the school day, Jackie, not as you know, the school day includes a breakfast club and a homework club afterwards, because that increases our you know, our contact time and our ability around diet and around educational development. The problem is it's just really hard to do at this moment in time, because to get kids back in September, you know, Jackie, you know, Roslyn Park, where I chair, with 3 elementary primary schools, 630 kids in the middle of an estate. It's not a massive site. It's not a small site. It's not a massive site. How on earth the creative things you're going to have to do to stagger to stop there being massive collections of people either end of the school day, around lunch times as well, make it challenging. So I have an enthusiasm for that, but I don't think that's practical at this point. But as I say, I envisage a school day as a long day anyway.
I think just leading on from that, I think from Brad Pierce in Plymouth, he said with the release guidelines of fully opening schools, how should schools and governors work with their caterers to bring children back into the dining hall, generate confidence, increase take up, and obviously at the same time, you know, concern about health and well-being of pupils. And it's all about jobs in the community as well. It's going to be quite challenging, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And you know, our frustration from the first wave of school opening, and you know, it became a bum fight, which largely during COVID we managed to avoid bum fights, but schools have a habit because it's an intersection of, you know, different political opinions, but also trade unions, parents, you know, everybody's got such a stake in it that when it comes to schools, the stakes are always very high. What I think didn't work in the first wave was that it was negotiated on the front page of newspapers in binary terms. Should kids be back? Should kids not be back? When actually the reality is that the answer is a slightly tautological one, which is kids should be in when it's safe to be in. And what that means at every school is different. And, you know, I see that across my constituency, 30 primary schools, 30 different approaches. And that's what has to happen here as well. I think there's an answer for every school. Certainly once you're willing to concede on the point, and the government have done this, if 30 kids, I'm thinking primary, I can extend it to secondary in a second. But if you're willing to take 30 kids as a bubble, then you can pretty much operate as usual, provided you can keep the classes away from each other. And that just takes creative staggering. I'm just as doing some heavy lifting in that sentence. But there's no greater pinch point. You know, you've got your pinch points at the end of the day, which should be able to manage, provided parents use common sense. But your pinch points around lunch times, and every school will have a different answer to that. And you know, again, very creative thinking will come from yourselves in doing that. But what I want to see, rather than these false binaries, you know, I want children back in September, as I say, but it is slightly unhelpful to pick a date and say you're all back in, because if it has to be a week later because that's what it takes to make a change in the kitchens, then it has to be a week later, and that would be a good thing. So I want to see leaders locally, academy trusts, local authorities, just have that bit of wiggle room to make it possible. Again, sort of transferring that to secondary, that should be a little bit easy, because once you can see the whole year group as a bubble, again, I think the science starts to get a bit questionable at that point. But Bilborough College just down the road for me, that means there's a bubble of nearly 950, which, as the principal said to me, is more of a mass gathering than a bubble. But again, you have to trust the government when they said they're being led by the science in these things, and these things will always be a balance of risk. But as I say, I think it has to be a very individual, localized solution to each. And that cuts both ways. I think that says government should not be just saying, right, it has to be this on this date, because I don't think that's practical. But also, and we avoided this in Nottingham, local authorities certainly should shy away from making blankets things saying, well, we're not doing that at all. I don't think that helped. I don't think that helped either. And it created this dug-in situation, which meant that the last sort of month's been a bit messy, and we can't afford that for September.
Yeah. Good point. Thank you. We've had a question from John Andrew Plant of GW Price. He has concerns about the free fruit and veg scheme, which has been suspended since March. And I'd sort of like to take that question a bit further, actually, and suggest that perhaps it's now the time to amalgamate all these initiatives for school food under one umbrella that can be delivered by school meals operators. We've got all the supply chains, and we can also make sure that pupils are getting the best nutrition right throughout the day, as a way of supporting the Prime Minister's vision for reducing obesity. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I have to be very careful when I start to try and set education policy, because I don't think Kate Green would want me to. Though I don't see why not. But I would always say there is a very strong case. Jackie, again, this in Nottingham, when you have challenges, it's almost death by pilot. That okay, we'll try something out. Let's try it here. And certainly when we were in government. There's a lot of one of my colleagues called drive-by policy making. Essentially, civil servants driving by and firing something at your community, and you now do this, and now you'll do a pilot of this, and a pilot of that. And all of these things are good, and you want to try it. And I always say that if you can make something work in our community, you can make it work anywhere in the country, because of the challenges we face. But it means you get a disjointed service that you don't get the best value for money for. So I would always say universal where possible, and try and bring all those different, very well meant, very good initiatives under one roof, because then you can go to one provider, as you say. So there's already value in that. But the link up, you get, you don't have the overlap or the duplication. And that to me seems a good idea. So I'll certainly take that away, because that intuitively, I think I'd agree with that.
Thank you. That's great. We've had another question from Stephen Foster. Do you see a wider role for schools as a broader community buildings in the future? So I think we're looking at food service supply chains. We relieve the challenge on supermarkets, food banks, that sort of thing. Do you see that as being something that could be expanded in the future, almost like a community hub as a school?
Yeah, that's something we talk about quite a lot. I'm never quite sure about that, if I'm honest, because there's already a lot going on. I think in my schools we've got an awful lot going on, and when you add things on, it makes it harder. There's more logistics to manage. There's more thinking around sort of staggering things to work around each other. So I personally wouldn't overdo that. I think the value is that it's a place that over the years, certainly communities that are relatively stable like mine, it's the institution after probably the GP surgery that touches the most lives. So there's a real value in that, and every year in building that relationship in, as well as saying, well, here's a support to either, the crudest, here's a voucher for free school meals, better, here's a high quality meal. It's then that, how do you take that into, and here's how you make your own high quality meal? Because I also, and I don't think I'm breaking any state secrets. It's a personal opinion anyway. But you don't want to foster dependence. You know, it's really hard because, again, it won't surprise people, but when we talk about free school meals, I got a lot, not many, but you got emails from people saying, no, this is wrong. And, you know, some of that would come from a sort of stigmatized and stereotypical view about, oh, it'll all go on beers and fags, which isn't my experience at all. But at others, people genuinely saying, well, this isn't a very good idea. And the thing for me is that, you know, you do it for the children. And the children, whatever circumstances that they've found themselves in, it's not their fault. And they need to be fed. And if you want to change their lives, you can't start until they've been fed properly. But that's not to say that you'd want it to be a permanent, forever thing if you could do better. And that's where I see the sort of community hub element being of how can we help them? But that might be, I think, sometimes signposting elsewhere.
Yeah. And certainly I know in Nottingham we've put together all the information about social eating places, all the food banks, and done a big amount to support that as well. So yeah, I think, yeah, it is key. And we have seen certainly a real uplift in the number of families going to food banks, you know, compared to pre-COVID. So yeah, I think that's crucial. We've got another question here. We keep hearing things that things will not go back to normal after the pandemic. Do you agree, or do you think that slowly we will revert back to the old ways of living?
I would, you know, as a betting man, I would be betting on the things being back to as they were because it's easier. So if you're trying to reconstruct, and we will to a certain extent be reconstructing every aspect of life, it's not, it takes a lot of bandwidth to start saying, well, let's make everything let's use this as a chance to leap forward 15 years. You know, so I have concerns about that. I think that's our job as an opposition, to keep the government honest and sort of brave and bold on that. You know, I think certainly, you know, obviously I spend my time talking a lot about healthcare and healthcare pathways. But at the moment, we've essentially taken our health service and completely re-geared it into one that focuses almost exclusively on respiratory medicine. And there's, you know, cancer work has stopped to a great deal. Transplant, certainly live donor transplants a little bit, but live donor transplants essentially zero, and some from those who passed away, but very, very minimal. So when you switch those things back on, you'd be an idiot to go back to how it was, because we know that those things weren't effective as they were. You know, without going off at tangents, we know that for organ donation, the outcomes for Black and minority ethnic individuals are terrible. So you wouldn't go back to that default, having learned that the impact on COVID on those communities was terrible as well. So we, I think, as an opposition, have to try and just hold the government and support the government to be braver in it. And we'll see. As I say, that won't happen across every aspect of life, because I just think there's too many. But it needs to be around the key ones, because what a waste to spend all this money and all this energy and then just go back to ways in which we knew weren't working. So yeah, that is a real challenge.
And not least of all, we can perhaps cut down on our travelling by doing more of these sorts of events, which, you know, hopefully means that we get more frequency and more contact. So I think that will be useful for everyone as well. One of the other questions we've got is around the funding for universal infant free school meals. LACA's advocating an increase to £2.51 in line with inflation. Is this a figure that you could support and advocate for us?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say 251 as opposed to 249 or 253, because without access, again, the worst thing in opposition, you don't have access to the sort of civil service and to all the evidence. But what I would say is, it's been static in cash terms for 6 years now. Is that right? Well, that's not sustainable, because your costs haven't been static. At a bare minimum, your wage costs haven't been. So there comes a point at which you can't do that anymore. And it's a false economy, because actually we know that quality, we need to value quality over cost. That is, and again, this will be the defining feature of Boris Johnson's premiership. As he rebuilds from COVID, he said, don't worry, we're not going to go back to austerity. Austerity was a disaster, certainly for communities like mine, because all you did was squeeze down everything to cost basis. But you know as well as I do, Jackie, who does the money go to, and the wages for our school services? People that live on the estate themselves. So if they don't have money in their pocket, they don't go into the shops. None of this is like great PhD level economics, but it didn't work, and we can't do that again. So we have to get back to a place where we value quality as well as cost. And yours is a really good example of that, because if you up the rate, then you'll get better food. You'll be able to pay your staff, as best you can, and that will be good for everybody and the community. And your return on investment as the state will be better than what you put in.
Absolutely, and that's our view, because there's a large number of school meal staff are actually, as you say, in the community. So it's a win-win really to do that. Yeah, absolutely. We've got another question here. We've heard of anecdotal evidence of the free school meal vouchers being used on non-food items. Will Labour be publicly supporting the end of the scheme in September in order to ensure that children can go back to having their healthy school meals?
Yeah, I mean, I've always, as I said, sort of in one of my previous answers, I'm always quite careful on that, because in any system there'll be people who do things that they shouldn't do. In my experience, it's a very small number of people, but what it tends to get used is the examples get used to kind of demonize the whole system. So I'm always quite reluctant to do that. We would always be very clear that those vouchers are for a purpose and should be spent on that purpose, and it's in nobody's interest for that not to be the case. But yeah, as I kind of said in earlier answers, I'm not that enthusiastic about vouchers alone. I think it's a crude thing, because actually I think you could get more for less through yourselves, because of the volumes that you do, and because of the quality that you're capable of. I'd rather that. So I put in a written question to Vicky Ford, prompted by LACA a couple of maybe 6 weeks or so maybe ago, and she came back and said that the vouchers weren't. This was not going to end in sort of vouchers forever. So I think we can have some assurance on that.
That's good news, isn't it? Yeah. Obviously, as businesses and local authorities, the PPN is crucial, and that runs up till the end of October. One of our questions here is that the huge challenge around the lockdowns will be ad hoc school closures and furlough scheme ending. And obviously we've got the situation in Leicester, which has now been extended. Do you think this is something that the Labour Party could be lobbying for, some increased support for those particular providers that are in those situations? Because there's clearly going to be more of these little bubbles of increases and lockdowns ensuing from that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the reality until we have a vaccine, basically. And at the moment, it's a bit, oh, poor Leicester, wonder what they've done wrong. But we'll soon realise they were just the first, and there won't have been any real reason. It's just the case. Yeah, I mean, as a basic principle, the government's view has been, I would share this as well. If your income as a school is basically still the same, which it is, then you should meet your outgoings. I don't think there's I'm talking at this point as probably a chair of governors rather than a member of parliament, but there's no moral case for us to stockpile that money on the balance sheet so we keep paying our bills. And I think the government should be encouraging and should be making sure that the Leicester schools closing shouldn't mean that the suppliers and the staff, etc., are punished for that. That's not fair. And then similarly on the furlough scheme, what we need now is a flexible furlough scheme. The blanket furlough scheme was a great idea, and the government should be applauded for doing it. It saved lots and lots of jobs. Now, how you emerge from it is really challenging, because people are starting to lose their jobs again, and you'll see a spike in unemployment unless you get that right. So what it has to be is, there has to be sensible and fair access to it. It seems to me absolutely obvious that if an institution is forced to close by the state, you should be able to furlough your staff and have those costs met. That seems perfectly reasonable to me. And that's what we've been calling on. And I think the government will move on that, because this Leicester thing is a reminder that this is going to pop up. And also, at a basic level, some sectors are getting back to normal. Well, some sectors, things never changed. Other sectors are getting back to normal. Other sectors, the pubs, for better or for worse, open tomorrow. Nottingham Forest versus Derby. I wouldn't go into town, Jackie. I'm not.
No.
When I saw the date, I thought, don't do it. Forest Derby.
Not on a Saturday. No.
Exactly. So, but again, you think of the theatre and the creative art, creative arts sector, they're not opening for some time yet. So you have to have some sort of furlough and, some sort of sector deal for them. And that's how it should be now. You just keep dealing with the imbalances as you go and hope that sort of day by day you're getting more and more on an even footing.
I agree. We've had a comment or a suggestion from Jeanette Ori. Could we change the term free school meals to school food provision? Because it's not free, we all pay taxes. And actually, one of the other colleagues said very true, because actually it might then take away some of the stigma around that.
Yeah, I have to say, I anytime you put something that's quite as stark as that language, it just inevitably becomes stigmatizing. It's meant that, in a world where some do and some don't, that again creates a level of stigma for young people. Anything that makes young people different from their peers is generally a bad thing. So I certainly think that's a good idea. Certainly, as you have a more universal model, it would only make sense that way anyway. And as you say, these things aren't free. It's the same as the NHS. You don't get free access to healthcare. You just pay for it in a better way. So I think I'd probably welcome that.
And we have got one other question from Sarah Hungerford saying, not COVID related, but what are your thoughts on the Ever Six scheme?
I don't know if I know what the Ever Six scheme is. I'm really sorry. I could try and bluster, but it's easier to not do.
No, absolutely. It's the funding for that schools get for the children that are eligible for free school meals.
Right. Okay.
So it's the sort of benefit related.
Yes. Yeah. So that's helpful. I mean, as you get to a more universal system, the need around that becomes less and less. I've always thought it's important to know who that cohort is so that you can measure your data on it. And obviously that's the cohort that you then get your pupil premium for as well. So it's important in that sense. But as I say, as you get to a more universal model, it becomes a sort of difference without a distinction, which, to be fair, for a lot of our schools in Nottingham is the case. We're 65% free school meals. So once you get to that volume, it's not a great, you're doing it anyway, aren't you?
Yeah, I think that's certainly there. And just one other question: what's it like being the shadow health minister during a pandemic?
Well,
on your personal trials and tribulations, other than keeping your dog amused.
Well, this is it. I mean, nobody's going to cry for politicians, and I would never ask them to. It's really hard. There's no two ways about it, and that's why I also bear that in mind. For if it's hard for us in opposition, for government ministers, it must be very, very hard. I always bear that in mind when I talk to my opposite number. She's working flat out and has worked flat out for a very long time now. So, it is challenging. I mean, we're a strong health team. I think, Jonathan Ashworth, obviously Leicester MP, who's our Shadow Secretary of State for Health, been doing it for a long time. We've got we're a really nice team that work together really nicely. The most challenging thing for us, and I kind of smile on this because I've got quite a strong view on this, but I can guarantee, you get to do a lot of media, which is great. Being on the health team, you get to do a lot of media, and I can guarantee as soon as I open my inbox, I'll have people, often Labour Party members, but certainly people to the left of me politically, saying you don't hit the government hard enough, you're giving them too hard a ride. And then I'll get people to the right of me politically saying, you're trying to score political points in a pandemic and you should be pulling together. And the answer obviously is on a knife edge in the middle, because there is no national interest in us saying that the government's getting it right if we don't think that they are. Particularly, our view is the government have been slow throughout, slow on the lockdown, slow on PPE, slow on social care. But at the same time, there's also no national interest in us trying to say, sometimes you can fall into the trap of, if they say it's Tuesday, you say it's Wednesday. And, that there has to be a sense of and we were in danger on the schools issue of getting into that place, which is why it's got to be better for September. So it's a fine balance. There's no manual for this. I can tell you how to run a good election campaign because we run elections, very frequently. I can tell you fundamentally what 90% of my election campaign in 2024 will look like. But for stuff like this, we're feeling our way just as everybody else is. And that's stressful and it's hard. But I'm also very mindful of the fact that however challenging it is for me personally and for my family, the families that we're helping is much more challenging because I haven't had to worry about losing my job. I haven't had to worry about my income. I haven't had to worry about my food. I haven't had to, you know, and sometimes it's not even the changes that cause the anxiety for people. It's the worry, the what if, and I haven't had to live with that. So, you know, you have to be mindful of that. And so instead, you know, I'm actually quite proud of what we managed to do locally. And, you know, we're still in it for the long haul, but yeah, it's challenging, but I still really enjoy it.
Excellent, that's good. Well, I think we're just about coming to the end of our session. I'd really like to thank you, Alex. It's been really interesting, informative session, and thanks again on behalf of LACA and our members, and hope you stay well, and thanks for all the work and support that you're doing for us on behalf of LACA. I'd also like to remind everyone our State of the Industry webinar is next week on the 9th. Details are on our website, and as you can see, we've just put that up now, and that's going to be followed by July the 22nd School Chef of the Year demo with Holly Charnock, with an important school meals from Greta de Fater. Please do keep sending in your good news stories and questions via our website for us to share, and hopefully I look forward to seeing you at our next event, and hopefully maybe in person in the not too distant future. So thanks again, Alex, and thank you everyone.
Thanks for having me.
No problem, thank you.